Okay, welcome to the Joint Pension Oversight Committee. We're meeting on April 21st at noon. This is our second meeting. And so the first order of business is just trying to plan for the summer. I assume that this will be our last meeting during the session because I think we're getting into the very busy time unless somebody disagrees. I think we should probably plan for the summer. Is that all right with everyone? So then I guess the question is how often we meet during the summer and when?
Do we have limited
Only
numbers of?
when needed. Well, that I assume is.
Right, but I mean,
Are we limited to the number of meetings that we have? What is,
My,
Well, if you look in the budget, there's $75,000 that was put in there for us to do business, but also to transfer if necessary to Jpoc for them to do analysis for us. So it kind of depends upon
okay, but there was
the
no,
needs of what we are trying to get done.
I think that was to look up divestment of certain funds.
Well, it certainly has that to do, as part of it.
I don't,
It wasn't confined, I think, just to divestment.
No,
that wasn't an Act 75 that created us. That's,
No, that's in
That's
this
in
year's
the-
budget.
okay. 6 meetings?
Yeah, unless you get, sorry, Betsy Wasser, my legislative counsel. So the committee may meet 6 times during adjournment and more often subject to the approval of the speaker and the pro tem.
okay, 6.
so we're on
approval.
2.
During adjournment.
During adjournment, so these don't count.
Oh, during adjournment.
So is once a month too often or?
That's fine. I'm unavailable until the very end of June. I am available in May, but then the first part of June through the 24th or so, I'm unavailable. So, but don't stop. That doesn't stop you from me. Just saying.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Senator Kitchell?
The only caveat I would have is my son's getting married in August and I really would like to
Yes, you
avoid,
should be there.
Yeah, you should.
I might. So August might be a little
Interesting.
hard. Well, also vacations in the summer are hard to, but
Right.
obviously I would prefer nothing until the last,
After the wedding.
after the wedding, which would be, say, August 20th, August 13th. 13th is the wedding, but that following week and the following week after that would be okay.
Senator Hooker?
I just have judicial nominating in June. So there could be a couple of days in June that I wouldn't be available.
I can be flexible.
Okay.
Yep.
Could send out one of those poll things.
Well, I know, but we could send out a doodle poll if people are responsive to that.
Always am.
Okay.
Especially if he tells me how to use it.
The last one I didn't know how to use.
Yeah, I think it proved to be a little challenging because it was
All right.
slightly different. Those changed the way they.
So at least I have some dates where people aren't available. I do think most of us would like to take some time off after the session ends. So I will not schedule anything
In May.
in May. And then we can move from there. So, all right, so I'll send out a doodle poll, hopefully today or tomorrow, so that we can get moving on that. So we get to our first substantive issue, which is defined contribution plans for new hires. And I believe we have Secretary Clauser here to testify for the administration. You want to come up to the table? Thanks so much for coming today.
Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity to chat.
So I have brought Commissioner Gresham and Commissioner Fastigi with me. I don't know if you want them to join us up here or if
Sure.
you want them to shout from the back.
No, it'd be better if they come up. As long as they don't mind bringing chairs, great.
I use this chair, is that okay? Or-
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
Glasses are going on now.
You guys look great up close.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so I thought before we started talking about the governor's specific proposals of the things that he would like added to the current pension bill, I just wanted to take a quick opportunity to talk about how we got here. And so the governor and the administration has been talking about structural change with respect to the pensions for some time. I think, as the governor has said publicly, he asked the legislature, in part based on their relationship with the unions, to take the lead in this discussion and to jumpstart this discussion, and really appreciates the hard work that the legislature and the task force did in doing that. And the recommendations of the task force, which the administration believes to be recommendations, and not a deal. That was always the intention, that they would make recommendations to the legislature for robust discussion and deliberation. And so those recommendations, the administration believes, is a really good start. They are a step in the right direction. They make some really necessary changes to the pension system, but the administration doesn't feel as if it goes far enough. And so the day after the bill was introduced, Commissioner Gresham sent a letter to Senator Kitchell indicating 2 additional structural changes that the governor would like to see in the pension bill. And those 2 are choice between a DB plan and a DC plan for new employees, as well as a risk sharing provision. Those 2 pieces the governor feels are incredibly important pieces in order to, create maintain a sustainable pension plan and system for state employees. And
I'm sorry, choice and the second?
risk sharing.
Risk sharing, okay.
And those are the 2 pieces that the administration has been talking about ever since, specifically choice and risk sharing. Why don't I start with choice? Does that make sense?
Yep.
So the governor requested to offer new employees a choice between a DB plan and a DC plan. 2 reasons for this. One is that offering choice over time will lower the state's risk exposure through partially reducing the volatility of required annual state contributions as the employer. It should also be viewed as a pretty important recruiting tool for the state, particularly for younger employees. Younger employees are more accustomed to kind of switching jobs. They're more interested in portability, and the choice would give them that flexibility. I think it's important to note that we have 17% of our new hires, 17% of state employees are with us for less than 5 years. We also, it's also a important recruitment for older recruits. 20 to 25% of our new hires are over 45. Those types of employees will not benefit from a DB plan in the way that a 20, 30, 35-year state employee will. And they're looking for choice. In fact, this morning, the governor's office received an email from a state employee who has been with the state for 2 years in transportation, offering support for a veto of the pension plan bill and indicating that he's suggesting that because he would like the opportunity for choice. He wants control over his investments and he wants flexibility. And so he would support a veto because he wants choice.
That's an interesting bit of information, but it's one voice out of thousands of employees. And it's a little distressing to say, because I'm not getting what I want, I would rather veto and not give anything to thousands of my colleagues, if that is the implied message there.
Well, I mentioned the email because I agree, it's anecdotal evidence, but it was received today from a state employee after listening to the press conference on Tuesday. And it is just one example of what we think is a trend in the modern workforce for younger employees who want that portability and want flexibility. So in addition to being a recruitment tool because of our turnover rates in less than 5 years and the percentage of employees who come into state service as a second career, being older than 45, or presumably a second career, might be their first. Another recruitment benefit is it's a lower required employee contribution. So DC plan participants contribute 2.85% of their salary versus 6.65% for a DB participant. So it's a lower contribution from the employee, and there's quick vesting. A DC participant is 23 months vested versus 5 years for DB participants. Sorry. So those are just some of the recruitment benefits. Again, providing choice will have an added benefit of helping lower the long-term risk the state carries while giving employees this flexibility.
Could I?
Go ahead, Senator.
Could you just refresh our memories? Because we do have choice for certain employees, exempt employees.
That's right.
Is that it, exempt employees?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm that was my memory. And so that would be obviously department heads and many other positions that certainly when you serve at the pleasure of the governor, generally doesn't come with a 5-year guarantee that you're going to be around. So I just want to confirm and how many exempt employees?
We have about 760, but let's get the exact numbers. Total is 1,100.
Okay, exempt.
Exempt.
And what is the split between what they have chosen, DB versus DC?
266 of them have selected a DC plan.
Okay, and DC and the majority, way greater majority obviously have decided to go with the DB plan.
That's right.
Thank you.
And Senator Kitchen, I'd like to add that the treasurer came into our House Government Operations Committee last week and provided a chart of historical trends with respect to the use of the defined contribution plan. And when it started, or at least the data she provided in 2000, there was a 43% uptake in DC. That has declined to 30% over that period of time. So, I mean, the interest seems to be going down. A lot of interest when it first was implemented, but it has gone down since then.
Thank you.
Senator.
Is there any guidance for people who are on defined contributions as far as helping them to, does the state give help in helping people invest?
I'll let Commissioner Fastigi answer that question.
Through the retirement office, we have, we contract, it used to be Prudential, it's just been bought out by a different Empower. But they have, we have retirement counselors as well in the retirement office, but also access to retirement counseling through Prudential. And they help employees navigate investment choices in the defined contribution plan, as well as our 457B plan, which many more employees are participating in it as well. So they can save above and beyond both the DB and the DC plan in our 457. So the retirement counselors are available through the treasurer's office, and the Department of Human Resources partners with them actually in our wellness program. We give employees incentive points to participate in activities, financial planning activities like that. So there are a lot of resources for employees to
And
help them.
most of the employees who are enrolled in the defined contribution plans take part in these?
Not required, yes. All employees have access to that. Anybody who has, who can participate in the retirement system.
Thanks.
So even temporary employees who may participate in the 457B plan, they have access as well to those investment advice. They're not going to give you specific advice on investments, but they will talk generally about it and talk about all the options and the variations and what they are, but they're not going to tell you what to do because that's not right.
I think that's been one of the concerns that people have talked about is when people do have the choice, that they fully understand the decision that they're making. And I know that certainly money becomes very attractive when it becomes available. And I know that my sister's a CPA, and she would say, portability is fine, but oftentimes if you change jobs, people don't roll over because the money is there, and you have needs, and it's sort of like, so and that's why the discipline, the fiscal discipline, understanding, et cetera, about what your choice entails is certainly, as Senator Hooker, I think, is why she's asking that question, is that that would all be part of whatever kind of information would be provided.
So in addition to the information that's provided that Commissioner Fastigi just mentioned, the treasurer also sends out a letter to employees that have choice that actually tracks the DB plan, estimated DB plan, and DC plan throughout, for your entire potential future employment. So there's information also provided regarding choice from the treasurer's office to new employees.
Could I just add one more thing, just to make sure everyone's clear? When new employees, exempt or classified, join government service, they are automatically enrolled in the defined benefit plan. So I, as an exempt, as an appointed official, when I joined, I was automatically enrolled in the defined benefit plan, as is everyone else. You have to specifically choose as an exempt to switch to a defined contribution plan. It doesn't happen
And I
unless
assume
you
you did
choose
that.
so. Personally, I did, but that's not a recommendation. But
You didn't even need to answer it.
I say that in part because I wouldn't put too much emphasis on the division between DC and DB among exempts. The default plan is the DB plan. That's not to say that it wouldn't come out the same anyway, but I wouldn't put too much emphasis on the current division. If people were offered a choice right at the outset, it may be different or may not, but just be aware that the default is the DB plan.
So it's an opt-in.
Sarah?
Thank you all for coming in. As you know, the primary focus of the pension task force was to come up with a plan to reduce the state's unfunded liability. And I'm just wondering what actuarial analysis you can provide regarding the governor's preference that there be a choice between DB and DC in terms of its impact on the state's unfunded liability now and into the future.
So we don't have an actuarial assessment of that, but I also want to be very clear that the governor's proposed plan to address the unfunded liabilities, the structural change he's requested, is both choice and risk sharing, which would have an immediate, the risk sharing piece would have a more immediate impact on the unfunded liabilities. And Commissioner Gresham's happy to kind of walk through that as well. I just don't want that to get lost in the conversation because they're two important pieces.
And I could add, you recall this summer, myself and the Human Resources team were in there. We did actually talk about recruitment and employee choice, and that for recruitment, for many people coming in, as the secretary was saying, a defined benefit pension plan is not something that's going to draw them into state service. And so we had, with that testimony, one of the things that we had hoped for was that the pension task force would actually look at that as an option, and we could get some information from the actuaries for the task force to do an analysis on that.
Well, as you're aware, because you visited the pension task force, this was a very collaborative effort, and the requests for how we focused our time and our requests of the actuaries came from the participants in the task force. We did not hear a great outcry from the employee members of the task force saying, we want to spend some time exploring either risk sharing or the option of having a defined contribution benefit.
I guess we're kind of late in the session, and the Senate has actually passed the bill. We started out with the agreement that we would deal with the underfunding and what was voted on unanimously. It didn't mean that we were closing the door to the question about should new employees be offered the choice. So I guess what is the message? I mean, this is, you passed the bill as well?
Yes.
It's come out of committee. Yep.
All right. So
out of appropriations.
And there weren't concessions, obviously. If I remember correctly, state employees were increased contributions when it got to fruition, $15 million. And that looked, compared to the ADAC of 37, seemed to be fairly significant willingness to come to the table and help underwrite the cost and stabilize the benefit. And then we did do the COLA changes that also minimize risk as it would relate to and the other structures that were put in place, like the VPIC, like this board, like more tracking. And so when you're looking at where we are right now in the process and two bills that have passed, I guess, are you basically saying at this point in the process, you want to have those, you want the bill modified to reflect these two requests?
Well, that was the communication we sent the day after the bill was introduced. And we've continued to advocate and talk about that.
And I will say, I did get the communication from Commissioner Gresham, and I shared it, obviously, because I'm only one person, and it was shared by leadership as well as the other members. And it was, the feedback was, at this point in the process, we wanted a bill that was clean. We wanted it to reflect the agreement that had been reached. It did not necessarily preclude the choice. I think the issue of risk really is a much larger kind of discussion and would have been a topic of the task force that I did not serve on, so I can't respond to that. But you're putting forth again, saying even though the decision was we wanted a clean bill and limit it to what was subject to the agreement, you still would like to have the changes incorporated.
Yes, the administration feels strongly that there needs to be additional structural change.
And the structural change would be the risk.
Risk and choice.
Well,
Do you have specific recommendations with respect to risk sharing? I mean, we've heard the DC thing, but I mean, this late in the game where the bill is already passed out of the Senate, it's passed out of our committee, it's passed out of House Ways and Means, it's currently sitting in appropriations, which is the last step in the House process. it would be hard. So do you have details with respect to the risk sharing?
So when we wrote our letter, we offered our services. Admittedly, it's a month later, but we were more than willing to speak about this earlier, to answer your first point. But our specific areas with risk sharing, I mean, there is any number of ways you can do it, but there's two main ways, and that is variable contribution rates or variable benefit rates through COLAs. Those are the two main methods that states use. I would add that in New England, three of our neighbors, Connecticut and Massachusetts and Maine, have gone that way. So we're not creating anything here. We would be in good company. There are a couple dozen states that currently do this, and we have a lot of information to draw on. But those are the two main ways to do it, either through variable contribution rates that base on a funding level. To the extent that you're at your targeted funding level or within the same realm, then, risk sharing becomes a background noise. But to the extent that you're below your funding level, then it becomes part of the mix. So that's what we would suggest, looking at those two areas.
Do you have any more details on that?
Which details would you?
Well, I mean, just saying you have variable contribution rates is fine, but, in order to analyze it, you need a lot more information than that. I mean, one of the things that the task force spent a lot of time on was getting very, very into the details of how we changed contribution rates, COLAs, and other things. And then having the actuary look at that information to make sure it was having the impact that we anticipated. Do you have that detail?
We can provide you any detail that you'd like.
And I should also add, Senator Kitchell has aptly stated what we have tried to do with the bill, which was stick with the agreement that was reached in the task force. And the Senate did an amazing job of fixing some technical issues on the bill. We are continuing to do that. But at this stage, it's hard for me to see how we would have time to especially with respect to risk sharing, to make changes. Now, part of what Act 75 did, in addition to creating the task force, was to create this oversight committee. And our obligation, as I understand it, is to look to see if other additional changes need to be made to our pension system. And that's why we asked you in here, is so we can look at that. But those changes are for the future, in my opinion, is because, as we know, all the work that we did in the task force, we met for 9 months?
17 years, I think it was.
to get to where we were.
I was so glad I had a conflict of interest.
So my concern is, in one meeting of the oversight committee, I struggle to see how we could solve this problem overnight.
Well, the other thing is, because of how we have set this process up, I don't see how we can do this without actually relitigating the work of the task force. And that we would actually have to have the representatives that came in that represent either the teachers or the employees respond and to vet it. And I suppose we would actually require more work from an actuary in terms of what this means. And so I don't even view this committee as a vehicle by which we can say, we're going to make these changes. Because I don't feel 6 of us can. And I don't think we could do it without our own due diligence to hear all sides and fully understand what it is that we would be agreeing to. I will be personal about it. If someone makes an informed choice and they feel that they can invest, or they only want to be in the state for a period of time because of family, I'm not opposed to the concept of offering choice. But what that means, it doesn't mean it's a closed issue for me. But I don't feel comfortable at this point without more discussion, saying that that's something, it seems like it's more symbolic than anything, considering 266 out of over 1,100, and it's been a declining trend. It's not, that doesn't, the data do not reflect an overwhelming support. Now, I admit that there are people where the portability is really preferential. And if you do pay into a D plan, I do understand you get the employee share back.
After you vest it.
Do you get anything if you leave before?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. You get the
That's right.
employee share, the
Yes.
employee share, yes.
With interest?
You only get the state share after you
With
vest it.
interest, though?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to be clear that even if you're not vested, it's not as though you paid in and you're
No,
getting
you
nothing.
get your own contributions back. That's right.
Well, I guess I'll say for myself, I understand the requests. They're not new. We had feedback. The issue was to me, the decision that came back, and there was consensus that we wanted, at least the legislation that we're moving now would be clean, and I feel that's kind of a commitment that was made. On the other hand, that does not preclude these discussions being considered in the future in a comprehensive and thoughtful way. So I don't see this as the last train leaving the station, but perhaps.
No, I would agree with Senator Kitchell. And one thing I just wanted to say, especially with respect to the risk sharing, one of the things the task force did was get a legal opinion with respect to making changes. And we can't just, as a legislature, unilaterally make changes to vested benefits. So have you got a legal opinion with respect to risk sharing? About our ability to do it unilaterally?
Yeah.
I don't.
No, we don't have a legal opinion.
That might be a good.
Big problem.
Well, that's part of why you need to have careful deliberation so that all the different collateral impacts and questions can be carefully and thoroughly examined.
Well, I would just say we think that it's incredibly important to continue to have these types of discussions, because while the pension bill, as we've said, is a step in the right direction, it doesn't go far enough. And so it's very important to continue to have these conversations on how structural change can help us move forward.
Sarah?
We're happy to continue to provide any information requested of us, and we'll continue to do so.
As Representative Gannon said before, this Pension Oversight Committee was created in Act 75 at the same time we created the Pension Task Force. And it was really our intention in House Government Operations in conceiving of this, that we need, as a legislature, in cooperation with the administration, in cooperation with the employee groups, we need to be looking at continuous improvement, not set it and forget it for a decade and come back when everything's crashing down. And so I would say, from my perspective, I think this is the perfect place for us to have continued conversation. And I personally, and I can't speak for my colleagues, but I think they probably would agree, I personally would welcome the administration coming with a proposal that shows here are the changes that we would propose. Here is the actuarial analysis that shows its impact to the state's unfunded liability, and therefore we would suggest that we move forward with this plan, as well as the analysis, as Representative Gannon said, on the legality of any of those changes, because it's one thing to come forward with an idea in concept, but if it cannot be implemented in practice legally, that's kind of a non-starter.
How would this be different from the changes this committee is recommending already? Why wouldn't this be under the same umbrella? Do you have a legal opinion saying that you can do these changes?
Yes, with an agreement.
So why would this be any different?
There isn't an
We haven't had
agreement.
a discussion, there's agreement.
But why would this be any different in terms of incorporating this into an agreement?
what entity would you expect we would be asking for agreement on this, since the task force rejected the concept of a defined contribution option during our meetings, and we didn't see a proposal from the administration with any specificity around risk sharing in terms of variable contribution rates or COLAs in order to have had that conversation. So we had agreement on the package that we put forward at the end of the pension task force in January.
And it took us 9 months to get to an agreement.
Yeah.
I mean, to get to an agreement in a matter of days? To get the legal work done, to get the actuarial work done, so that we know what we're talking about in a matter of days?
You all may have an actuary who's ready at a moment's notice, but we found that it took at least 2 weeks turnaround for each of the scenarios that we asked for.
Well, and I know I have said this, I just feel like I need to reiterate, this is not the first time we have presented these ideas. We presented them informally previously. We presented them formally to Senator Kitchell, who shared them on March 10th. So it's not 2 days before the end of the session that we're coming in and presenting these ideas. I just want to make that clear because
but there isn't any more specificity on what you're asking for and what the impact would be.
That's right. And
there was.
We're happy to engage in those discussions, but we received the message pretty clearly, which is consistent with what we're talking about today, that the legislature wanted to have a clean bill with respect to the recommendations that came out of the task force. And so we weren't invited in to discuss and provide additional recommendations or language. And so I just think that's an important piece of this.
Senator Hooker?
Thank you. Are you talking about the recommendations that you made coming after the task force? Did you go into the task force and ask about this, talk about this while this proposal was being formulated?
You weren't on the.
No, I wasn't on the task force. So I have, what was the administration's role in letting the task force know their desires?
Sure. So the task force did not invite, or reach out to representatives from the governor's office. Commissioner Fastigi went into the task force by invitation and provided information on the DC plan. I'll let her talk specifically if interested about that. Commissioner Gresham attended, again, by invitation, a task force meeting to specifically talk about revenue issues.
And Commissioner Pichek, sorry.
I was going to say,
On the task force, I don't recall him asking us to invite either of these fine folks back to talk specifically about the defined contribution option or risk sharing.
Which raises the question, since Commissioner Pichek, and we have high regard for him, did you ever communicate and ask him to make these requests or bring these issues for discussion as a member of the task force?
So risk sharing and choice, defined contribution, what were discussed in the task force. Those concepts and issues were discussed by the task force.
Well, I was just getting back to your comment about we weren't invited, but I was thinking that in fact there was a presence there in the form of the commissioner. And so I was just wondering to what extent you were using that membership to advance these discussions. You're saying they were discussed. So that's all I was trying to clarify.
And again, I wasn't on the task force, but do I understand that Commissioner Pichek voted for the proposal?
He did.
He did. He voted with explanation. His explanation was very clear that he was presented the final report without enough time. I think it was 24 hours before the vote, and he didn't have time to digest. He indicated that there were lots of things within the proposal that he agreed with. And that he was voting yes in order to move the conversation forward, but that he was voting yes personally, and that he hadn't spoken to the governor and was not voting on behalf of the governor. But he did vote in support of the task force recommendations.
Well, we need Judge Grierson's with us, and I want to give him an opportunity to testify. Thank you for coming in. And as the Representative Copeland-Hanza said, we would be glad to continue to work on this within the Pension Oversight Committee.
An invitation will certainly be forthcoming.
Yes, and we will invite you to our next meeting to work on this. So thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
Where did Judge
Judge Grierson.
He just needs to speak and then he will come out front. Oh,
Otherwise.
Where am I?
Whoops.
There I am. There. Good afternoon. I know your time is tight, so I will try to be quick. For the record, Brian Grierson, formerly Chief Superior Judge, now actively retired Superior Judge.
an oxymoron.
actively? That's like jumbo shrimp.
It feels that way sometimes. And I want to thank the chair and the committee for giving me this opportunity to speak on behalf of the magistrates. Their request, they are presently members of Group F and have been since their inception in 1990. Their request is to move to Group D with other judicial officers. I think this request is consistent with the provisions of Act 75 that spoke to issues relating to equities among the parties. And clearly we see this as an equity argument among the judicial officers that are impacted by this. I have provided the committee with a memo summarizing I've referred to it as the evolution of the role of magistrate, because as you can see, if you've had a chance to look at that, that the role of the magistrate has been expanded significantly since it was first created in 1990. And I'll speak to that in more detail in a minute. For those of you, just to familiarize the committee with Group D is exclusively the judicial officers. There are 34 trial judges, 2 environmental court judges. They are all superior court judges and go through the same retention and appointment process. 5 Supreme Court justices and 14 probate judges. I think the probate judges present an interesting, are interesting in this discussion because with the exception of the probate judge in Chittenden County, they are all part-time judges. The Chittenden judge is a full-time probate judge. The others are part-time judges, meaning that if they so choose, they can maintain their judicial office. Probate judge, they're elected every 4 years, but they can also maintain an active legal practice. And obviously they all came from a legal practice. I can't tell you how many continue to maintain that, but they have that opportunity, if you will. The summary that I provided, I think, explains best why we think over the course of time it becomes a matter of equity that the magistrates should be considered members of Group D. We recognize that there is an additional benefit cost if they were included in Group D, but at least, and I will tell the committee, we have not done an actuarial study of what that cost would be. In brief discussions that I had with Chris Roop during the task force committee, and listening to his testimony before this committee, at least initially, he made some brief remarks. And my impression is that although this would add some additional cost because of the increased benefits, that in the overall picture, it would have a minimal impact on the finances. And so the thrust of our argument is from an equity standpoint, as among the trial judges. When you look at that memorandum, a couple of dates stick out to me. The 1990 was when the position was created as part of the reorganization of the courts and essentially the creation of a formalized family division. You'll see in 1993 that the Chief Superior Judge, then Chief Superior Judge, was authorized by the legislature to provide that the magistrate in Essex County would serve as that county's presiding family court judge, and that has continued throughout the time up to the present because of the limitation of resources and time in that particular county. Essentially, that magistrate then serves as a superior court judge in the family division. In 1999, their jurisdiction was again expanded by the legislature to establish, modify, or enforce temporary orders for spousal maintenance as opposed to child support in divorce cases, and proceedings to modify or enforce temporary or final parent-child contact orders. Some of you may be aware that a substantial portion of any family division in any county involves the modification of existing orders. So the magistrates have taken on that responsibility in many of the counties to assist that docket. Again, in 2010, this represented a procedural as well as a substantive change. Procedurally, at the beginning, although the magistrates were appointed through the normal appointment process, they never went through the formal retention process that all superior court judges did. Initially, they were either appointed or they were reappointed or not reappointed solely by the governor and if reappointed by the governor, it had to have consent of the Senate, but they did not go through the same retention process that superior court judges do. In 2010, you'll see by the reference to the statute that was changed so that now all of the magistrates go through the same appointment and retention process that superior court judges do. And you will see in that same section that they were then their jurisdiction was expanded to establish parentage and temporary parental rights and responsibilities in parent-child contact. As you can imagine, a substantial portion, I don't have the numbers for you, a substantial portion of any family docket includes not just divorces, but the establishment of parentage where parties are not divorced, but may have lived together a substantial period of time and have intact families, but not recognized through a formal marriage. And so the addition of that authority again expands their authority to essentially the same as a superior court judge sitting in the family division. And those issues are important because, quite frankly, those are among the most important decisions that any judge or magistrate can make at the inception of a domestic case, because those decisions have a way of obviously continuing during the course of the proceeding and are extremely important. Finally, I would point out the legislature it enacted actually through Administrative Order 18, I should say, gave the then Chief Superior Judge the authority to assign active or retired magistrates to the Superior Court. In other words, and during my time in that position, it was quite often would happen quite frequently that I would assign a magistrate to a family division, not only to under their existing authority, but to allow them, because of their familiarity with the case. And what is important in any case, and particularly in family division, is when a judge or magistrate has determined those issues I was referring to earlier, the initial issues of parent-child contact, spousal maintenance, that there be continuity. And so there would frequently be times when I would appoint a magistrate to conclude the case and essentially assign them as a superior court judge to conclude a case by final decision that they had sat on previously at the inception. So, and we continue to do that. The thrust of our argument really is that if you look how the position was originally created and how that role has expanded over time, that they have all of the earmarks, if you will, and the responsibilities to a great extent, not all of the responsibilities. They don't, they're not subject to the rotation assignments that I would routinely make as superior judge. There are designated regions, 5 designated regions throughout the state that have not changed since their inception in 1990, and a magistrate is appointed to each of those.
Judge Grierson?
Yes.
The Senate's about to be called to the floor.
Okay.
So I just want to give everybody a chance to ask any questions. Senator Kitchell?
How many magistrates do we have? And I guess, do you see, you talked about how these positions have evolved over the years when they really were focused on child support. And then we now have judicial masters. So how many magistrates do we have? And would we be seeing the same argument for the masters?
Let me go back for a minute. There are 5 magistrates. There have been 5 magistrates from the beginning in 1990. There are 5 regions that they are assigned to. Those assignments do not change. So a magistrate will sit in those counties. The judicial master is different in the sense that the judicial master is hired as an employee by the chief superior judge through that office, and therefore the process is completely different than a superior court judge or magistrate, and their jurisdiction, quite frankly, is limited more so than the magistrates. But the magistrates, the number has not increased, and for all the time I've been on the bench, there has not been a movement or suggestion that we need more magistrates. That number has remained intact since 1990.
Okay, thank you. I assume masters, but I just wanted to.
That was a good question. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much, Judge Grierson. I mean, the Senate has to go to the floor, and unfortunately, House GovOps has to
Have their room.
have our room back.
And I just again want to thank the committee for giving us this opportunity. I know that we look forward to working with this committee on this issue, and if the committee wishes, we can make arrangements to have a magistrate come in so you'll understand their role perhaps better. But I do think this vehicle, this committee, is the appropriate place to discuss this issue, because it does raise issues separate and apart from the overall pension reform that 286 speaks to. So I thank the committee for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Judge Grierson.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we can go.
One other
Sorry.
that I would not related to this request, but in Senate Appropriations, we took up a bill, and it's the you may have heard of it, and that's the disparate treatment between sheriff's offices. And some are locked into one plan and some have, so you have
Yes.
some sheriffs who have a 30-year plan, others have 20. There's great, obviously, instability because people would like to go to the 20. And so we do have language in the budget that would, and they are willing to fund the cost of the actuary to do the analysis and to see if we can finally bring some resolution to the, well, this is another area of inequity and great instability, and towns are feeling that they've spent a lot of money sometimes to get an employee certified or send them to the academy, and then then they, as soon as they can, would move to a different office. So I just wanted to alert the committee that, that language is there. And that may be another issue that would come before the committee.
Oh, good.
Sounds like we'll have a few things to talk about over the summer.
All right.